The
out
lounge is
there.
open. We're open.
The lounge is open. I'm very low energy today, but it's not going to be a bad episode. It's just I did a lot of household chores and before this, and this week I've been working a lot, so I'm very chill
Yes,
right now.
I also did a lot of chores. I went to a brewery before this, and then I got a blizzard from Dairy Queen, not a sponsor. So I as well had a very eventful.
Oh, but without further ado, let's finally get into Spiral from the Book of Saw, the movie that is a Saw film, kind of, but not really, but it also is.
Starring
Uh,
Dwayne the Chris Rock Johnson.
along with Samuel L. Jackson.
Yep.
You screwed me up with that Johnson. I was like Samuel L. Johnson. Um, and directed by franchise. What's the word I'm looking for? Man, my brain is roasted. A regular of the Saw franchise, Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed Saws 2 through 4.
Hmm.
So, Jimmy,
Yeah.
what is your history with the Saw franchise up to this point? What were your expectations going into this, and what were your initial impressions?
Well, my Saw history is I thought that I saw 1 through 4 and that was it. But then in our car ride back from after the movie, um, I realized that I watched all of them, but not seven though. Right? Seven. I watched one through
The
six.
3D one.
Yeah, I didn't watch seven. I watched 1 through 6, and I really enjoyed 1 through 4. I don't remember 5 and 6 that well, but I really enjoyed them. And I watched them when I was a teenager, so I was younger, and I thought they were really cool. I liked the traps. I liked the effects. And then later, as we were talking, it made me think that maybe I only liked those so much because I was younger. And if I went to rewatch these movies as an adult, maybe I wouldn't like them so much, which you had the ability to go and do. And you warned me not to do it. Do not ruin what I think. So I'm going to say right here, I liked 1 through 4. I enjoyed them. I thought they were really good. And yeah, this movie was no different. I mean, it was different. It's very different. But I still enjoyed it. Was it a great movie? No. Did I go in thinking it was going to be a great movie? Absolutely not. When you go in and your expectations are a little bit lower, I didn't have high expectations because keep in mind, everybody, this wasn't a movie that I was looking forward to go and seeing. I wasn't waiting for the next Saw movie to come out. I saw it when I went and saw Mortal Kombat. I saw a trailer for it and I was like, what? They're doing another one? And I remember texting you. I was like, hey, we got to see this one. And luckily, it fell on a filming weekend and we went and saw it together, which I think was the best part. It was the first movie we've seen in a long time since Parasite, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And my first movie back in a theater outside of
Mhm.
the private screening that I split with some friends for Godzilla versus Kong.
Yeah, so it had a lot of good things going for it. And I think at that point, did I enjoy the movie? Yes, but I think it had a lot of boost from, this is only the second time I was able to go and see a movie. Now in this kind of like getting back to normal, quote unquote, whatever that is for you. And also us seeing a movie together. So it already got those boost of points. But I think overall, above average. It went above my expectations. I thought the traps were cool. I think a lot of people disagreed with me after the movie we were talking about. I think the traps could have been a little bit more gory. I know anybody watching at home, they're like, "Oh, it was pretty gory to begin with," but I think they could have went a little bit more crazy with those. But we're gonna get into those later. But first impressions, they were good. So it's
Yeah.
probably just a good movie. I recommend watching it. Am I going to watch it again? No. Is it getting a second watch? No. Did I enjoy the
All
first
right.
watch? Yes. Second watch, it's not getting it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that might be smart because I think that this is a movie that again. So yeah, I all right. Let's go. Let's look at it from this angle for a second because I've been thinking about this a lot. I don't know who this movie is for because if you are a Saw fan, this movie actively tries to not be like the other movies. And it succeeds. I don't think that this feels like other Saw movies, especially towards the end of that franchise. It really got into this thing of like plot, it comes second. Like it's kind of like making it up as you go, and it's really just a person who every 10 minutes walks into a new trap set piece and has to do the thing. So you either love that about the franchise, or it's the reason you hate it.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's for necessarily for Saw fans because I don't think it's enough like a Saw movie that Saw fans are gonna like love it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think it's a little too close to a Saw movie for people that if you're like Saw is torture porn and I hate it, but this looks different. This still has that degree of um, brutality and like meanness. I think that mean streak that is maybe going to keep some people away. So the only thing that I can think of is like this is just for horror fans. This is like a movie that I loved going to the theater to see it for the same reasons you did. I loved seeing a movie with you. Loved going back to the theater, getting popcorn. And I was kind of looking forward to this because I rewatched the movies before this, and it was a mistake.
Yeah.
They do not hold up well. I do enjoy. I actually think the second one is a pretty good movie still. And I think I have a soft spot for Saw 4 because way back in the day when I was first collecting DVDs, I think that was like one of the first R-rated films I ever bought, and it came with a little insert, a little clip of film
Mhm.
from the actual negative from the shooting, which I thought was like a cool little souvenir thing. So I had a soft spot for that one. Um, but I think that this is a movie where you're going to watch it once, and I would recommend it's out for rent now, which is perfect timing for this. It is now available to rent digitally, which I did not know was going to happen. I still would have wanted to see it with you, but I didn't know it was going to come to rental. I would still wait until this is like down to like 5.99 for rent or something, and then like have a couple of friends over that like scary movies. Have a couple of beers. You will probably enjoy this movie. But if you watch it a second time and you think too hard about a the message of this movie, which we'll get into a little bit, and b just kind of like the logistics of it all, which have never been a strong point of the Saw franchise, you're gonna have maybe not such a great time.
Yeah. I
But
would agree with you on that 100%.
we are in the same boat because my first impressions were my bar was low going in, and I walked out having enjoyed myself.
Yeah.
So let's get into what are some highlights from the movie, some things that you did enjoy about it, some things that stuck out to you, some things that maybe you weren't expecting from a movie that has the Saw title attached to it.
Yeah. I mean, so this is kind of tough because even though I say that I really like, it met my expectations, it's hard to think of like one thing where like it was just a little bit above my expectations. So like thinking of like one thing that I was like, oh, this is it. But when we got into the car, I did enjoy, with the exception of some of those like shots where it was like shaky and Chris Rock was like shaking around and
Right.
stuff. I thought the cinematography was well done. I enjoyed it. I liked the choice of how they went about the traps and the way the angles worked. And I thought that some of the traps were cool. They were newer, I guess, than some of the old ones. It seemed like they were thought through. Especially the one with, I think my favorite trap was the finger one.
Yeah, that was a brutal. So there's really like four main
Yeah.
traps, which is pretty low for like a Saw movie. Again, kind of maybe trying to distance itself a little bit, but I think with the exception of the first one, which I think is a little weak, I do think that these are pretty interesting traps. The finger one in particular was a highlight in terms of you're a gore hound, or if you're looking for something that's going to kind of make you um,
Yeah.
cringe a little bit. It's a good it's a well thought out trap. It's an interesting design, and it's definitely I think kind of the centerpiece of the movie.
Yeah. And then the rest of these traps, and it's fitting too because he's not Jigsaw when we find out later. So like some of the other traps are like homegrown, kind of. I mean, they were easy to put together. I mean, you figured the one with the train and the tongue is locked up, and all he has to do is jump. That's a simple one. And then and then the wax one. It's funny
Yeah.
because he
So I
wasn't trying to
guess let's
kill anybody, but everybody ended up Spoiler,
Right.
which you should
Well,
already
and
watch these anyways, but
this is something that I noticed. So interesting you say that because this is something that I noticed when I watched the earlier Saw movies. Is I was like, man, nobody ever really beats a trap. It's like Amanda from the first film. There's usually like some kind of survivor at the end of them, like a final girl or final guy or whatever. But for the most part, the people especially when it moves on to um, Saw, the original Saw movie was people in individual traps. That you get that a little bit throughout the series, but what the series turns into is people encountering other people that are in traps and having to save them. And
yeah.
that's the point where they start to really not let anybody live. Almost everybody, whoever is like put in a trap, you see the effects of them losing that game or that trial. And it's in service to the people going to see that movie because they want blood and they want limbs and stuff like that. It's not a plot driven thing. It's just there. It's a
No, but this one had some
prior to
plot.
this film.
This one actually
But
had
yeah,
some plot, but
do you think we should get into spoilers or not? And we can cut this if you want to. I'm
no, I
trying to think.
think
The only reason I'm
I
thinking about it is because it's not. It's technically available for rent, but it's not like
I'm a
full.
firm up believer. If you're watching this podcast, either A, you want to know what we're talking about and you want to watch it anyways. Like if I were to watch a podcast about a film and if I didn't see it, I would expect spoilers in it because that's how you talk about it. And B,
Right.
if you haven't watched the movie yet, go and watch it and then throw this on right after. It's only going to be about a 25-minute, 30-minute talk anyway. So yeah, I'd spoil it away, man.
Right. Because I just think we don't usually go over plot, but I think that there's a couple things that will help us kind of explain what works and what doesn't in this movie.
Yeah.
The traps, first of all, the main traps or whatever. First one is a crooked cop who's lied on the stand. He wakes up like standing on a pedestal, like in the middle of the subway, and his tongue is in a vice. And if he all he has to do is jump off of the thing, and it will pull his tongue out. His weight will pull his tongue out, and then he'll be free to get off of the subway tracks.
Yep.
Um, and he fails. And this actually goes in hand with what you were saying. Darren Lynn Bousman directed this, who directed Saw 2 through 4, and so weird because, like you said, I thought that this is pretty easily the most like technically proficient Saw film from a directing standpoint. It looks like, again, it looks like not a Saw movie. Like
No.
the early Saw films and the later ones, I'll have this extreme saturation. There's like these greens and these blues and these oranges, and everything is very colorful. And this movie doesn't have that early 2000s look to it. At the same time, it does do the thing. It's revealing like what a trap is, or like revealing that what that person's situation is. The camera will speed up really quick and then stop and slow down, and then speed up really quick and then slow down. And it feels like it's straight out of Saw 2 or something like that.
I
So
think those are needed. I don't know, certain to an extent. I think in the Saw movies you need those. I think
uh,
there's a line that you have to be careful that you don't cross, and doing it for the traps is fine. But when you start to see Chris Rock start to get into these like manic and he's panicking and stuff, I don't think you need to do it then.
yeah, I
But
agree.
but the traps were
Um,
fine. I think doing it with the traps is okay. Using it too much, you're kind of losing me, and they did lose me a little bit. But mostly that scene where Chris was in that car.
Very weird shot where he is in a car and he's upset. He's like kind of losing his mind or whatever, and the camera like shakes as he yells. It's very it's like a music video shot. It
Hmm.
kind of is what it reminded me of. Other traps, the one we referenced, the finger trap. This is a man who shot a who actually not the crook. There's a lot of crooked cops in this movie, but this is a man who shot. What did he do? Did he shoot somebody by he
Yeah, so he was in
shoot
the
somebody
middle
who
of a
didn't deserve
traffic
it?
stop. He was in the middle of a traffic stop
Oh,
under a
right,
bridge,
right.
and he ended up shooting the guy and like in the car for no reason at all. And that was the big thing.
The guy flipped him off or whatever, and he shot him in the car, and so he wakes up and he's got these kind of Chinese finger trap things attached to his fingers, and he's got a couple of bars in his mouth, and he has to bite down on the bars, and they will pull off his fingers just one by one, just rip him off, which is gnarly. And if he doesn't do it, he gets electrocuted. He's sitting in like a pool there's got like copper wiring hanging over. Doesn't make it. Third trap, and they really make a point to shove this down your throat in retrospect. They're like the head of the department, and there's like things where Chris Rock is reading a note, and it's like you will lose your don't lose your head, and so the head of their department who has quote unquote, I think they use this verbatim. They're like, "You've never stuck your neck out for everybody, or you keep your head down, or something like that." She is lured into an evidence room and is put on a table where there's a blade behind her neck, and she has to push her neck down and sever her spinal cord in order to stop a faucet, I guess, of boiling wax that's hanging above her face, and it eventually covers her face and hardens. And Chris Rock he finds her, but it's too late, and he's pulling it off, and she's you know
This part of the movie
hurt
kind of got
himself.
to me a little bit, I will say, when because he, out of everyone we've seen so far, he could have cared less if they died. Like he didn't. Well, besides,
Right.
so
Well,
I guess,
because
well, it was his friend. I mean, his really good friend. But then he kind of understood, like, okay,
he
I
didn't
get that.
right,
Like,
and he also didn't know that there was a killer because Boswick, the
yeah.
first victim, was the first one to go, who he was friends with. He also didn't know that there was a killer starting
Yeah.
a
No, but he seemed almost
something.
happy when the other guy got electrocuted there, because him, like, throughout the beginning of the film, they had some heated discussions and they were angry. And later on in the film, we find out that the reason why Chris got shot was because of his lack of judgment and just kind of sitting around hoping that he died. So I think he deep down he's like, yeah, whatever. But this is the first time
Right.
in this trap world where we see him run down, and he starts peeling the wax off of her, and then immediately goes into giving her CPR, trying to like survive. But it's like the weirdest CPR. It's not even like he's just like kissing her, and then he hits her chest once. That's one thing that I noticed. It wasn't like CPR. He peels her
It was
face
just
off. Let's just like the
yeah.
wax in her face. It's like one and one. Peels her face off, and then he just like kisses her, and then he hits her chest, and then he goes back to like making out with her, and then he's like, oh shit. It's like he's forgetting that he's trying to like save her
Bring
life.
her
It was
back
so
to
weird. It's
life.
such a weird couple things that were just
Yeah.
really weird for me. But
I like that you said Trap World. I think this movie should have been called Trap World. I think that's maybe a better title than Spiral.
yeah.
Um, let's okay, but that's perfect transition into because before we get to kind of the final trap and the finale of the film, character wise, Chris Rock plays a cop who turned in a crooked cop for shooting a witness. And so his whole department views him as a snitch and a rat and all this stuff. There's a scene where he gets to his desk and there's like a dead rat. And it does bring up the question, because this happened like a long time ago. It brings up the question, like, has he just been in this department for 15 years getting like a dead rat put on his desk like every day?
Well, he was
He's like,
undercover.
oh, another one.
He was
Hmm?
undercover.
What?
He was undercover at the beginning of the movie. He was undercover because they were robbing that place.
Oh, that's why they did it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he
All
was
right.
undercover. And
You
then
got
when he
me.
finally comes back, now he's like a cop in the office. And he didn't want to stop being undercover because he still got to be a cop and he didn't have to deal with anybody. But once he was not undercover, his cover was blown. He had to go back and deal with all the nonsense.
See what I mean about being easy to please? I think you paid attention to this more. I think this just kind of washed over me, and I was like, hey, I know that guy.
I was
He's
paying
the
attention
funny
heavily
guy.
because I was like, this movie is going to disappoint me somewhere, like it didn't. But I was paying
Nothing,
attention. I was like, somewhere,
right?
somehow, this movie's going to find a way to disappoint me.
Nothing specific that totally let you down.
No,
Um, So, and his father is played by Samuel L. Jackson, who, when he learns that Chris Rock, back, when after Chris Rock had turned in this crooked cop, he learns that his son is being kind of mistreated by the rest of the department, and he kind of puts the finger on everyone who's mistreating his son. So they try to establish this motive that Samuel L. Jackson, who goes missing halfway into the film, could be the killer, and it could be because they were mistreating Chris Rock. You
Let
know,
us know in the comments if you watch this movie and you thought that his dad was the killer. So I think they tried to make it seem like they tried really hard
yeah.
to make it
Well,
seem like it was him, which made me realize it wouldn't be him. I think they tried
well,
too hard.
I guess that's the thing is like, yeah, exactly. I think like so you go into a movie like this, you know there's going to be a twist.
Mm,
So when they obviously try to establish that he's like the killer, you clearly know he's not. And I completely agree with what you're saying. I think maybe it was a little heavy-handed on that.
yeah.
Um or they didn't, I will say they got me twist wise. So Chris Rock gets a new partner, a rookie cop, and so you're watching this movie and you're pretty much thinking, okay, we know the killer is targeting crooked cops, and we know that it's going to be a character we know. It's probably not going to be Samuel L. Jackson because that'd be too obvious. There is a part in the film, and I should have thought about this more when it happened because I will say it got me, where his partner dies, quote unquote, supposedly. They find his body, and he's like a victim of the killer or whatever. Um, I bought that.
Yeah, I
I thought he
didn't.
was done.
That's kind of that part. Like, so there was a couple reasons why well, I guess I'm going to spoil it here. So later on, we do find out that his partner is the killer. In order for me to explain this part, and the reason why I kind of came to this conclusion is there was a couple reasons. When they killed him off, I was like, "There's no way." That was when I realized, like, all right,
Well, they never showed him. Here's the thing: is they show everybody's traps,
yep,
and this is where I should have thought about it, and I didn't.
yep.
They didn't. They never showed
They never
his
showed
trial
his. They
or
never
whatever.
showed anything, and it was him being skinned alive was the thing. They never set a precedent like why he would be like. They were only targeting crooked cops, so why would he be killed? He's
That's a great point.
yeah. So they're targeting
That's a great
crooked
point.
cops. He is a rookie, supposedly. He did nothing wrong. He seems like a genuine dude. And when they first are introduced, Chris is talking about his like divorce and stuff, and then the guy is so like, oh no, well, my wife's perfect, my life is perfect. And every time he was like, well, if she goes to Pilates, and she's like, oh yeah, she loves Pilates. It's like, well, we're in counseling. And he's like, oh yeah, we're in counseling. He kind of just seemed like he was just agreeing with him and everything he said. And I was like, this is weird.
You never see his wife. You never see his kid.
No.
No. Even when they show him at home for a scene, you don't see his wife or his kids.
Oh.
Yeah. So the end of the film is reveal. Oh, and I guess there is one more trap. There is a trap where the crooked cop that Chris Rock had turned in um, is wakes up in the same room as Chris Rock. This was kind of interesting. They did a throwback, bizarre but interesting. They did a throwback to the first film.
Yep.
Chris Rock wakes up chained, handcuffed to a pipe on the wall, and there's a saw there, and this is like featured in the trailer. And then he finds a bobby pin and is able to undo his handcuffs, which I guess it makes sense because the killer wouldn't want him to find it, obviously. Um, it is kind of this thing of like, what if he didn't see it? Like, what if he totally, like, there are some things that happen in this movie that I think are, again, the logistics of it. It's like very convenient. A lot of the time, it was me not knowing how the killer knew where somebody was going. So, like, for example, the guy that gets stuck in the finger trap, he's doing his investigation kind of rivaling Chris Rock's because they
That
don't get
one was
along.
weird. I guess now that you talk about it, the way they find these people is kind of weird.
Well, he doesn't. So it's not like he's like radioing. It would make sense if he was using the police radio, and then this guy has access to that and he knows where he is, but he doesn't, and he just kind of ends up in the same place as this guy. So these are the kind of things that happen out of convenience. But
yeah, and you shouldn't really think too much of them. I've learned in my my review discussion world is don't think too much into this when it has nothing to do with like carrying the plot forward. It's just I would honestly rather them be like, this doesn't make sense, and this movie be a 2.5 hour film. It was perfect at an hour and a half. If they kept like trying to do these like ins and outs of where everyone's at, it would have been a 2 hour film, and I would have absolutely hated it. So I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they didn't.
very true. And there is a thing that doesn't make sense at the end of the film that they address, which is very funny to me, and we'll get to that. But there's this trap where the crooked cop that Chris Rock turned in, he unchains himself, and then the crooked cop that he had turned in in his past is hanging up, and he's hanging by his wrist, and he's standing on this like crate, and behind him is I don't know. I guess I don't know what any of this shit. This is also the thing of Saw movies is you're just like, how did they make that? Like, what is this? What is the practical reason for this thing to exist? It's like blowing air out very quickly, so it's kind of like uh, a what do you call it? Like an
I,
air tunnel, like a wind tunnel.
yeah, I have no idea
It's
how to
it's
explain
like
what this thing.
several small wind tunnels, and above them is a grinder of sorts. And there is a conveyor belt with glass bottles that are being broken in the grinder, and then they're hitting the wind tunnel things, and so all of the glass is flying at this crooked cop. And Chris Rock makes the decision to save him, um, which again, as you said earlier, we find out. So he tries to save him, and he's too late. He gets the key too late. So he meets William, finds out William is the killer, and William's not happy that he tried to save the crooked cop because the killer wants Chris Rock to join him in killing crooked cops, which is a crazy thing to think about. That this thing would just keep happening, like that they would go from like department to department somehow and just find these people and just keep doing it. Um, he even says, this is the thing that didn't make sense to me, that I just think it's funny that they wrote it into the script. Like, it's almost this thing of like, it's so dumb that I give them points for it. He says, you know how hard it was for me to be placed in your department and get partnered with you? You're like, you're right. That doesn't make sense. How did you make that happen? But they just put that in there as like a throwaway thing,
Yeah,
which is funny. So you find out that Williams has kidnapped Samuel Jackson, Chris Rock's dad, and has strung him up like a marionette. And the puppet in this film is not the traditional jigsaw puppet. It is a pig. Because get it because of the cops. It's a very it's a very clever movie, and he strings him up like a marionette, and he has all of these IV tubes coming out of him, and there are jars on the ground collecting his blood as he hangs there. And so Chris Rock has two choices, which again, this part didn't really make sense to me. His choices are to shoot William because he hates him and he's so mad at him for killing cops or whatever that he knew were crooked and for
yeah,
kidnapping his dad, or he can save his dad. To me, that's a no-brainer. You save your dad because he has one bullet and he has to shoot this target above Samuel Jackson, and then he is released. To me, it's like it's a no-brainer because why would you would free your father and then you're a cop, so you would just go after the guy, which
yeah.
he does. He
Well,
does.
very late in the scene, you have two
Right,
options.
but there's this
I don't know. He could
he
have
there's this
killed.
whole thing of him like thinking about it, and you're like, what
Yeah,
are you thinking about? Just do the thing, you know?
or he could have just shot William and then thrown the gun at the bullseye and probably would have accomplished the same thing.
He's also a well, I guess he was kidnapped, so he didn't have his gun on him. I was gonna say he's a cop,
Yeah.
so you'd think he maybe have a gun on him, but I guess he probably
No,
didn't.
I think that was a lose lose because the way that William tied up that room when the SWAT team starts coming back. So he makes the decision to save his dad. William starts to run towards the elevator. They're sawing in to get the door. They hit the trap, and he gets like struck back up. So I think it was a lose lose. Either way, I don't think it was ever intended for him to like come out on top.
Yeah. I think he probably anticipated what Chris Rock was going to try to do.
Yeah.
But there is this, and somebody pointed this out online that I thought was interesting. So it is kind of a Night of the Living Dead twist where at the end of Night of the Living Dead, uh, the survivor, who I believe's name is Ben, a black man, um, the police are approaching the house, and he is like the survivor of this zombie attack, and they shoot him because either they think he's a zombie, but also there's this kind of undercurrent of racism in the '60s, and it's this idea of the police shooting a black guy, which this it's not an exact parallel because the thing is the lighting. What happens is Chris Rock frees his father, then goes after William, and William is able to essentially restring Samuel Jackson so that he is up like a marionette, and he has a shotgun hanging from his arm, and the lighting is such that it is like four spotlights on Samuel Jackson, so you just see an outline of a guy with a gun,
Hmm.
and so the SWAT team kills him. And this is maybe the one thing that this movie does that I think is clever to an extent. I don't even know if that's the right word, but I think it's the one thing the movie does competently is that you have this it is revealed there's so many reveals in this movie and in this franchise that Samuel Jackson allowed for this uh, Action 8 or whatever it was. It was this bill or whatever that made it easier to for the cops to target people
Yeah.
and such. So you find out that he has kind of allowed this department to become crooked, essentially. And so I think it is a good ending or good writing that he is essentially crooked cop that is executed by cops at the end of this film, not doing their due diligence or whatever. Um, that's maybe the one thing this movie does correctly. The rest of it, it feels to me. I know. I guess we should probably start to wrap up because this is going long, but it's a good discussion. I think it's the most we've probably had to say about a movie, which maybe says something about it. It feels closer to Seven, the film Seven, than the Saw series to me. It feels like a detective film first and foremost, with these little moments of Saw that almost feel like they were pulled from a different movie that are kind of interspersed throughout.
Yeah.
You know, it feels more grounded in reality than any Saw movie, except for no, than any Saw movie. Even the first one doesn't feel this realistic. This feels like actual kind of serial killer detective film to me.
Yeah.
Um, I think that again, I guess the end game, and we've said it a bunch of times, but my final thoughts would be that I enjoyed this. I would watch this again with people if somebody hadn't seen it and they wanted to watch it. I'd probably watch it with them. Um, but there have been so many recently because of the current political climate and social climate. There have been so many movies, horror movies, that have addressed these kind of things really well. Like most notably, Jordan Peele's first two films, especially Get Out and Us. But there's been a lot of kind of social justice themes in horror
Yeah.
lately because there's this idea that real life right now is kind of a horror for some people to live in, and so that fear is very real. And I think that this movie is kind of a cheap it feels like a pretty cheap version of that. Like I don't think it really says anything about I don't think there's any message at the end of the movie that's like, they're not saying either way, we have to reform the police or police reform is impossible. I think it just kind of uses it as a motive and runs with it.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree.
but as a the unique film in the Saw franchise and as a horror thriller and just as the first movie that I saw back in theaters, had a good time. I would recommend that people, if you're interested in seeing it, you probably know what you're getting into and you're probably going to enjoy it.
I agree. Yeah. 100%, man. 100%. I mean, overall, I mean, it's definitely, I know at the end of these, we sit back, we ask ourselves if the bar is closing, it's last call. Do we serve? Chris Rock approaches the bar and, as Spiral, do we give him another drink? And he gets another drink in my book, but he gets
Me
one.
too.
He gets one.
He gets one. And it's kind of one of those things where you're like, uh, yeah, I mean, like it's technically 145, so like I'll give you one more, but also like you better be ready to hit the bricks in like 10
Yeah,
minutes.
can you get your friend off of the ground? Like, I'm trying to close up here soon.
You're right, for sure. He gets kind of hurried off, but we'll give him one more, and especially just for the fact that, and I think this, you know what, we talked about it earlier. Things we liked about the movie. A lot of people, not like Chris Rock in this, did not think that he was good. I enjoyed his performance, and even though the movie lacks Samuel Jackson for plot reasons,
I think it was
um,
for financial reasons more than plot reasons, but
that's probably very true.
it's
I
probably
think but in both cases, I do think that they carry maybe a not so strong script.
yeah.
Script that is just kind of okay, it's there, it's very straightforward. I think they carry the material, and just the fact of being like, wow, it's kind of interesting that Chris Rock apparently loved Saw movies so much that he decided to make one and star in it. That alone is interesting enough to see this.
Yeah,
And the fact that he got
100%.
Samuel Jackson in it is like was just
Pretty cool though.
absolutely bizarre. Also, the trailers before this, just got to say, Samuel Jackson. There was like 3 or 4 movie trailers, all
Yeah.
featuring him.
COVID
He's in like a
COVID stopped a lot for a lot of people, but not Samuel L. Jackson. He's in like
no
25 movies coming out pretty soon, which I was like, what the
late
heck?
late career renaissance, and it seems like he's just. If I mean, if he did this, it seems like he either owes somebody some favors or he's just doing what he wants and does not care.
No, I doubt he
So,
cares.
all right, well, that is our take on Spiral. Lukewarm but positive, I would say overall. Um, Next week we have kind of a weird one. I'm very excited to talk about this movie because, and I know you're not. We're actually like tipping our hands right now about how we feel about this movie. And I will say, I cooled on it because we watched it and I liked it quite a bit more than you did. Since then, I've thought about some things and I've cooled on it. But I will still say, I think I am taking the positive position and you are taking the negative position. We are talking Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead.
Definitely doesn't need a
Net-
Snyder cut.
the Netflix, the 2.5 hour Netflix zombie heist epic that is full of green screen
Green
and
people.
green people and neon lights and a whole lot of weirdness, some of which works and some of it does not. So that is streaming on Netflix now. If you would like to join us next week at the Lomo Lounge, please view the movie because we will be talking spoilers.
And
Otherwise,
before we end, I'd like to give a shout out to you, Jay Irvin, our Patreon member. Thank you for your support. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to join our Patreon and get into our Discord, we have plenty of tiers. You go to patreon.com/Lomo Media. You can check out all the tiers yourself, $3, $5, $10, and $15. All of those include getting yourself in the Discord and watching the movies with us and talking about them and going over them before we film each and every episode of either at the movies or after the movies. So we'd appreciate any support you have and that you can give.
absolutely. Thank you, Jay, for being our first Patreon member. And also, I would just like to say, and I think we may have mentioned this in the last episode, or it may have been another podcast entirely. So that's why I want to bring it up. But the response to After the Movies has been so positive that we this is a free show now,
Yep.
and it will be for the foreseeable future. You will get an episode of After the Movies every week. After at the movies. Um, and then we'll do a third show called After at the Movies or
We'll
at
call
the
it
After
no. We'll
Movies
call it during the movies.
during them. The commentaries, maybe there may be a place for that in the future. We'll see.
Shout out to Tyler who cornered me and said it was stupid that we were gonna put this one behind a paywall because it was so good. So, thanks, bud.
Yes, thank you. And so in its place, the only thing that's going behind the paywall is our Shooting the Bit video podcast.
Yep.
But you can still get the audio for free if you look up Lomo Media on Spotify or Shooting the Bit.
Yep.
So otherwise, expect this and At the Movies in your feed.
We should put me behind a paywall and at the movies, or like you behind a paywall and at the movies, and me behind a paywall and after the movies. You only get half of the podcast.
Yeah, you have to subscribe to get both halves of it, and then you have to have like somehow you have to have 2 devices and hit play at the same time. We'd still be talking all over each other. Me specifically talking over you because I'm a fucking talk too much.
Uh,
All right. Well, this was a fun one, buddy. I think this is our longest episode yet, if
It
I'm not
is.
mistaken.
Yep. Definitely was.
So interesting. People, let us know what you think of the Saw franchise in general. I'll tell you my favorites again: 2, 4, and this film. Maybe 6 after that, but it gets pretty muddy from there on. But let us know your thoughts on the Saw franchise as well as this film if you get to see it. We'd love to hear them. And that is it for After the Movies.
Have a good one, everybody. See you next week for Army of the Dead.
Get the hell out of my bar.